Okay, so good morning. Today we are on Daf Tzadik Bet 92. So we are at the Mishnah on the top of Tzadik Bet. So let's dive right in. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. So we are continuing our discussion in this chapter of workers' rights. Now, specifically dealing with the right to eat while working. So let's pick up with that Mishnah at the top of Tzadik Bet Amud Aleph. So Ochel Poel Kishus Afilu Bedinar. That when the worker is working with the produce, even if there's a cucumber that is worth a dinar, and presumably even more. This is not meant to sort of be limiting, but you are able to, the worker's allowed to eat it because that's what he's working with, and you're allowed to eat what you're working with. Koseves afilu bedinar, and similarly, you can eat a date even though it is worth a dinar. Rabbi Elazar Chisma Omer lo yochal poel yasser al shcharo. Whereas Elazar Chisma clearly disagrees. He says, no, you can't eat an unlimited valued item. You can't eat more than what your wage is worth. The Chachamim say it's allowed. Now, how do the Chachamim differ from the Tanna Kama? That we're going to have with the first question in our Gemara. Aval, what does the Chachamim add? Melamdin as ha'adam shelo yehei ra'avtan. You shouldn't be a glutton. You shouldn't. We teach the worker that he shouldn't be a glutton because why? V'yehei sosim as pesach b'fanav. What are people going to do? He's going to come. He's going to develop a reputation of eating more than what you were going to pay him, and no one will hire him. Exactly. So the door will be closed in front of him. So, all right, so that's our Mishnah. So, Chachamim, Hainu Tanakama, what's the difference between the Chachamim and the Tanakama? So, Ika Benaihu, there is a difference, and we're going to offer three potential differences between them. So, difference number one, Aval Melamadin, that's the part, the quote unquote, the words Aval Melamdin, that is the difference. But Tanakama Leisle Melamdin, according to the Tanakama, you wouldn't have to teach the worker, and you don't have to teach the worker, and maybe you're not even allowed to teach the worker, though the Rishonim argue about that. The Rabbanan Islu Melamdin, whereas the rabbis say that no, you have to teach the worker. Now, why might you be prohibited to teach the worker? Because we've seen that that muzzling an animal can be done even with one's words. So this could be viewed as muzzling the worker with your words, and we would maybe not want to allow to do that to happen. In any event, the bottom line is that that is difference number one potentially between the Tanakama and the Chachamim. So Ibai Sema, or we could say Iga Benaihu to Rav Asi. The difference between the Tanakama and the Chachamim is whether or not Rav Asi is accurate. Well, what did Rav Asi say? Well, I'll tell you. The Amar Rav Asi, afilu lo scharo elab livtzor eshkol echad ochlo. That if you hired a worker to pick just one cluster of grapes, he could eat that entire cluster. So not a particularly good business deal for you as the employer, but it's a pretty darn good deal for you as the worker. So Rav Asi is clearly saying, so maybe, although both the Tanakama and the Chachamim allow you to eat more than the value of your wage, do they allow you to eat the whole thing? That would be the question. And presumably, again, this is now according to Rashi, the Tanakama would agree with Rav Asi, and the Chachamim would not. Or alternatively, Rav Asi taught a second thing, but Amar Rav Asi, Afil lo batzer ela eshkol echad ochlo, that even if he's going to pick lots of bunches of grapes, if he's only picked one, he can't eat that whole one. Okay, so the meaning that there's a slight difference. Now, maybe when I heard these two things, I'm like, well, look, if you could eat the whole thing, then you could certainly eat the first one. But that's not actually where the Gemara goes, because Utsricha, actually, the Gemara says that you need to be taught both of these rules. Without teaching both of the rules, I might have thought something different. Because if I only taught the first ruling that you could eat the entire thing if you ordered the whole thing, if that was the whole job, because at the end of the day, the one cluster is what a worker eats. You hired him to do one cluster. So we're going to give preference to the worker. And so you end up with nothing, but that's your fault for hiring him to just pick one cluster. But but in a situation where you know you're going to have more than enough to fill, to fill the worker's tummy, so as a result, there's going to be left over to put into the kli that is going to be given to the employer. Ema lesav Beresha v'hadar lechol. He should, maybe we are going to tell him that he needs to put the first bunch into the basket and then he can eat. He has to do at least something. But when there's not going to be anything in the basket anyway, so maybe he doesn't. So and of course, if you had only taught the second case, that I might have thought that only where you're going to have left over can you eat the entire first group of bunch of grapes. But when you aren't going to be able to fulfill the desire of the employer at all, libasov, at the end, amalo, maybe I would say that you don't get a chance to eat the whole thing. So tzricha, therefore, both rulings are necessary. And again, according to Rashi, the Tanakama would agree with Ravasi, and the Chachamim would not. Now, note
But Rav Elazar Isla does not agree. He says you can't. Lo yochal par yoter al scharo.
Yes, we're not dealing with Rav Elazar Chesma's opinion at the moment. This is just again the question that opened the Gemara. If we turn back to the question to start of the Gemara, Chachamim hainu tainakama. What's the difference between the Chachamim and the Tanakama? Seem to be saying the same thing. So we are trying. This is another answer to what's the differences between the Chachamim and the Tanakama. You're absolutely right. Rav Elazar Chesma would totally disagree. Okay. So Iboy Sema, or here's a third potential difference between the Tanakama and the Chachamim. Ika Beinahu de Rav. What Rav said is the difference between them. Well, what in the world did Rav say? Well, good. Fortunately, the Gemara is going to tell us. Dama Rav, Motzazi Megillah Sesarim be Rabbi Chia. Be Rabbi Chia. That I found a Megillah Sesarim in the yeshiva of Rabbi Chia. Now, what exactly is a Megillah Sesarim? Very interesting opportunity that we have right now to understand something that is not well understood, and frankly, I'm not sure that I really got this until now. I assumed that it was the case, but didn't really have any proof. But here's the story. What happened when the people in the time of the Gemara or the Mishnah were learning, and they learned something really good, and they, did they have to remember it right off the bat, and that was it? Or were they able to write it down as a facilitation method for remembering? Well, that's what Megillah Sesarim is all about. That what they would do is, if we take a look at Rashi, it's just under halfway down in the Rashi. Megillah Sesarim, Megillah Tamuna. It was a hidden Megillah, a hidden scroll. Lefisha Asar Lichtov Hilchos, because it was prohibited to write down halachos, because Shahaya Shomea Davar Chiddush, V'yare L'shochacho. And so when you heard some great new idea and you were afraid of forgetting it, Hayakosvo, you would write it down, Umaster Mina Ayin, and then you would hide it away. So this was a method of learning, of education, and it's an important skill that we have even today. If you want to remember something, you are much more likely to remember it if you write it down. And that, by the way, that goes beyond, you're going to be more likely to remember it if you write it as opposed to typing it, even. But in any event, the bottom line is that's what we're talking about. So, okay, so now we've given the background, the interesting background about this hidden scrolls. But Rav found one, and what did it say in it? Because of Isi ben Yehuda Omer, and it was written in it that Isi ben Yehuda says, Kisavo b'cherem re'echa bevias kol adam hakasav medaber. That when the Torah in where is this? This is in Dvarim, Parakav Gimel, Pasuk Hey. In Dvarim, when it says that when you come into the vineyard of your fellow, you can eat what you desire up to your, when you're full, but you're not allowed to put it in your basket. That according to Rav Isi, this is talking about anybody walking into your field. Anybody can walk into your field and take some grapes. As Rashi says, "Bevias kol adam afilu ein schiro," even if you didn't hire the person. Okay. Now, Amar Rav lo shavik isi chaya l'chol bria. That Rav said about this, Isi has not left any opportunity to have a life. Meaning, if all of the work that I do in my field, you can come and every poor person and any person in the world can come and have some, that's just going to take away everything. So, Amar Rav Ashi, Amirta Lishmaita Kameda Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi says, I told this to Rav Kahana. Dilma ba'osin b'su'udaso, the abdu va'achlu. Maybe this is only talking of people who are working for their meal, meaning that they'll come in, they'll do an amount of work that's associated, you didn't hire them, but they'll do an amount of work that's associated with the value of the meal and of what they're going to eat, and then they'll eat that, and that'll be the deal. And maybe the Torah is telling us that is an open deal for anybody who wants it. That if you are interested in coming into somebody's field and working it, you're a migrant worker. That's right. That you have the right to do so, and you come in, you do the work, and you get paid from the food in the field.
We learned a few days ago, however, that that's not the case. That he can't just walk in if you don't. That the Gemara is only dealing with people who are actually paid as paid laborers. No one can just walk into your backyard and start eating the food there.
No, that's what Isi ben Yehuda is disagreeing. Isi ben Yehuda is a Tana, so he has the right to disagree with that and say that the pasuk is talking about something different. So you're absolutely right that it's completely different from everything we've heard, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. Now, I don't know whether we paskin that way, but the point is that that's exactly the point. I don't think we paskin that way, but the point is that that's what he was saying.
Why isn't that Geneva?
Because it's not Geneva if the Torah says that that's allowed. Right? If the Torah says that you're allowed to go into somebody's field and have grapes up to what you're full, but you're not allowed to take any grapes with you. If you take any grapes with you, that would be stealing. But you're allowed to take some grapes. It's sort of like an extra protection for people who are destitute or people who are traveling and happen to thought that they were going to make it to the next field next inn, but they didn't make it. Charlie, did you have something you wanted to share?
Well, 1 year out of every 7, anybody can do that.
Well,
That is
correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We just heard that last Shabbat.
Exactly. Right. We can call this a Daf Yomi coincidence. But in any event,
that's Shvi'at. That's a little different.
Of course, it's different. But the point is that again, this is the way we're understanding Rav Isi. Now, again, Rav Ashi has now reinterpreted Rav Isi and said that Isi's comment is actually about working for the field without being hired. So again, it's not necessarily just coming in and eating for free, but now he said, and so maybe that should respond to Rav's concern. But Amar Li, Rav Kahana said to me, Afilu hachi nikale leinish laoger agure v'niktefe lefardase. Rav Kahana explained, even so, a person prefers to hire the people that are working in his orchard. And so as a result, Velo Nezu, in his vineyard, Velo Nezu Kule Alma Va'achlule, he doesn't want everybody to come in. After all, if you come and eat and you're hired day after day, you're not likely to find, after 3 months of working in a vineyard, the grapes might not be so exciting to you. So the point is that we're going to Rav's comment even applies. So all of this has been brought in order to emphasize that the question is, do we agree with Rav Isi or do we agree with Rav? So according to Rashi, if we take a look at Rashi, Rashi specifically says, Tanakama lace-lay de Isi. The Tanakama would disagree with Isi, and Rashi explains why. Daha ochel poel katani, because when the Tanakama said, he referred to a worker. The Rabbanan Basrai and the rabbis that were afterwards that are mentioned in the end of the Mishnah, Islahu de Isi, they would agree with Isi. The Kamar, and this is what our Mishnah is saying. The Chachamim say it's mutter le'echol yoter al scharo, to eat more than your wage. Because even somebody who hasn't been hired is allowed to eat. So that is the understanding of this. And again, when it says lav lav sachir nami achil, it could either go according to the literal reading of Isi, which means that it's somebody who hasn't even been hired for the work at all, or it means somebody who hasn't been hired by the employer, but is working essentially works voluntarily, has hired himself to the field, and is now going to eat the value of the field.
So according to that interpretation, how did the Chachamim disagree with Hiskama, I think, who gives the second opinion in the Mishnah?
No. The second opinion says you're not allowed to eat more than your value.
No, that's right. He does say you can. Rav Hiskama says you cannot eat more than your. It says it.
No.
I'm sorry. No, he said you're right. He doesn't say that again. Okay, that's right. Okay.
So Ibailahu Ho Mishal Lohu Ochel O Mishal Shemayim Hu Ochel. So now let's back up and ask the following question, and we're going to explain why this is a relevant question. But when the Torah says that a worker has the right to eat, is the Torah being generous, and the Torah itself is sort of doing gemilas chasadim, doing kindness to the worker? Or is the Torah saying, no, this is part of their wage. This is really what they've earned. And why does it matter? L'may nafkamina. Well, so again, is the worker eating his own, or is he eating from heaven? So l'may nafkamina, what difference does it make? And as Rashi says this very nicely. Mishalohu okel tosefes schar hu shosifa lo Torah. Is it just adding to his wage that the Torah is doing? O mishal mashamayim, or do we say that it's from heaven? B'matanas gemilas chasanim, and it's a gift of kindness, shekishar matanas aniyim, like other gifts for the poor. So which is it? So we are going to have first l'may nafkamina. What difference does it make? So the amr tanu leishti uvanai. Well, if the person says, "Give it to my wife and to my son," well, then to my children, if it actually belongs to him because it's considered part of his wage, well, then he has the right to say that. But if you say that it's just that God has given him a charitable statement, a charitable gift of allowing him this gift, but it's not meant for anybody else, well, then l'didei zakile rachmana liishto uvanav lo zakile rachmana. But then it was only for him and not for his wife and children. So which is it? So we're going to give 10 efforts, and that's going to be all the rest of today's daf. 10 efforts, all of them except for the last one will fail. So let's take a look and see how that last one will eventually succeed. But we will, but let's go through it together. So Tashma, number one. Well, 1 second, we said that in our Mishnah that the worker is allowed to eat even if it's a dinar, even if that's more value than the employer is getting. So the employer is getting, effectively the employer is losing on this deal. So kosebes va'afilu b'dinar, and similarly a date, even if it's worth a dinar. V'i amra b'shalo hu ochel oger bedanka achel bezuza. Well, in second, if in fact we're going to say that it's his own, that the Torah made this part of his earnings, what kind of employer is going to hire somebody for 1/6 of a zuz, and the person is going to end up, and for a benefit of 1/6 of a zuz, and the person is going to end up taking away a full zuz. Here the eating is not just necessarily potentially more than what the worker gets, but it's more than the employer gets. The elamai mishel shemayim huokel. Oh, so what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me, okay, so it must be that he's eating from heaven. No, that doesn't work because oger bedanka achel bezuza. You're telling me that he's eating for a 6, and he's eating. He's working for a 6, and he's eating for a zuz. That is totally a bad deal. So even if you were to tell me that it's from heaven, it doesn't make sense. You're just going to tell me, well, the Torah is really nice to him. But then v'hakanami rachmana zakile. You could say that about the wage also, meaning even if it's the wage, it doesn't make a difference. You could say that it's just about it's a kind wage, just as you could say that it's actually from Shammai.
How do you say this is I'm having different? How do you say this is min shemayim? If it's a hefker property, so God, the land is open, but the owner, this person owns the property. So it's not. Is it really from shemayim, or is it from the owner's own wealth? I think there's a distinction here.
No. Well, look, it's similar, although not identical, because obviously you're right that in a hefker situation. Or let's call it, instead of a hefker situation, let's call it a peya or leket or shichacha situation, right? So then is it considered that when the person is trying to get it from the field, that it is from heaven, or is it from the person's own efforts? And again, it would affect whether or not you are allowed to do stuff, with it. What are you allowed to take for yourself and to take back home, etc. All of that will be affected by the answer to this question. But the point is that again, the way Rashi says it, if you again take a look at Rashi, Mishalohu Okel O Mishal Shamayim, are we considering this effectively a Hashem instituted part of a person's wage, or is it Hashem just being kind? And the difference is can the person send some of it to the rest of his family? If it's considered part of the wage, of course he can. If it's considered a gift special for him, so then maybe it's just a privilege that workers get, and it can't be going to somebody else. So now we're going to effort number 2. So Tashma.
So it is certainly possible that an employer could hire someone for even more than the company is worth.
100%.
That is how Mario Lemieux ended up being the owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins hockey team.
That is a very much a correct statement. And in fact, on some level, that is our answer. Our answer is Hachinami Rachmana Zakile, that actually the Hashem could potentially say that that's what a wage is. So you're absolutely right that you could have that. It was the Hava, meaning was that you couldn't, and the Maskana is that you could, and that's why it's not a good proof. So Tashma, now we effort number 2, similar effort. Rabbi Lazar Chasma, Omer lo yochel poel yoser al scharo. The worker's not allowed to work for more, eat for more than his wages. The Chacham say it's mutter. My love, isn't this what they're arguing about? Demar savar mishalohu ochel, right? According to Rabbi Lazar Chisma, he's eating his own. right? But and that's why you can't take more than what your wage is. Umar Savar Mishal Shemayim Huocha. Whereas the other one says you're getting from heaven, and so obviously it has nothing to do with your wage. So, lo, Dekuliyama Mishalo Huocha. Actually, both of them could say that you're eating from your own. V'haka Kinafshaka Kamiflagi. That actually what they're arguing about is the meaning of Kinafshaka in the pasuk. Right, the pasuk says, when you come into a field of your neighbor, and you eat the grapes, as you want, as you desire, you can eat to your satiety. I don't think I pronounced it that way, but all right. The el
Satiety. Satiety.
All right. Anyways, and you put it in, but you cannot put it into your kli. So I'll say it this way: until you're satiated. There we go. So the point is that you can't put it into your kli. So what did the word kinashika mean in that pasuk? So Mar Savar, when it comes to Rebbe Lazar Chisma, what does he say? B'davar shemoser nafsho alav. That what kinashika means is what you're putting into it. What you're doing, what you're risking your life for, meaning your wage. So therefore, kanavshika means setting a limit. Umar Savar Kanavshika teaches something else. The Chachamim say, no, ma navshika im chasamta patur af poel im chasamta patur. No, Kanavshika is teaching us a completely different thing, and it isn't available for this lesson. But rather, it teaches us the following: that if, in fact, you muzzle yourself, that is something that you're totally.
Hold on just a moment.
And so, as a result, when given the fact that of the analogy between you and your own workers, you would not be able to. You would be allowed to muzzle the worker. So although you're not allowed to muzzle an animal, you would be allowed to muzzle a worker. And so as a result, that's really the lesson is what is Kanashika teaching. So again, it doesn't have to be that the machlokas is about whether or not it's min hashamayim. So Tashma.
So you can prevent the worker from eating then?
And you would then be able to, yes, you can prevent the worker. You're not violating a Torah prohibition from muzzling. You might have liability associated with it. So it's not a Torah prohibition, but you might have financial liability for that, as we will see, God willing, tomorrow. And at the end of today, we'll talk about the ability of one to negotiate away one's rights to eating. And we're going to talk about that later today.
But we've been discussing all along that a worker can eat while he's working. How much, when, where, but now to say that we're allowed to muzzle him seems to be contradictory to everything we've been learning up to now.
And it's not contradictory, because what we've been talking about is where there is no agreement. It's the base level agreement between the worker and his employer, but the worker has the ability to agree with the employer to something different. That, for example, one can agree to get double the wage and agree not to eat. So we're going to see that at the end of today. So you'll see, you have a chance to ask any questions that you have in connection with that. So Tashma, hey, 1 second. What about the following brisa? Nazir shamar tenu leishti uvanai, give to my wife and to children. Ain shomenlo. We don't listen to him. Ve'i amar mishalohu ochel amai ain shomenlo. Again, of course he can't eat. But why would we prohibit him if we're considering this part of his wage? Shouldn't he be allowed to give it to his family? So no. Hasamishum lech amrin nazira score lecharma lo tikrav. Because what this is an often in learning quoted phrase of be careful that you don't put yourself in a bad situation, right? Don't if you're tempted by X, don't surround yourself with X. So if you're a Nazir, don't go into a vineyard. We don't want you in a vineyard. And so as a result, we're going to effectively say to the Nazir that if you go into the vineyard, not only are you not going to be allowed to eat the grapes, of course, because you're a Nazir, but we're not even going to allow you to send them to your family. So Tashma, next effort. Effort number 4. Poel Sha'amar. So now we have a worker who says, listen, Tanula Ishti, Uvanai, give it to my wife and to my children. Ain Shominlo. Whoa! Even though he's just a worker, we don't listen to him. Again, why don't we say that if it belongs to him? So my Poel Nazir. No, what does the worker mean here? It also means a Nazir. One second, Vahatanya, Nazir, Vahatanya, Poel. One second, we got 2 brises, and they're essentially inconsistent because one brisa uses the word Nazir when it means Nazir, and the other brisa says the word worker when it means Nazir. Well, Gemara answers in some ways the obvious answer. Midi Gabi Hadadi Tanyan. Did we learn these 2 brises together? Meaning, were they taught by the same person such that they need to be consistent? They were not. And so as a result, there can be inconsistencies in language between brises, and they're both really teaching the same thing. Well, here's a third brisa that says something similar. Tashma minayin lepoel she'amar tanu leishti uvane she'ein shomin lo. How do I know that a worker who says give it to my children or give it to my wife and my children that we're not going to listen to him? Shenamar be'el kel yicha lo sitain. Because the Torah tells us you're not allowed to put it in a vessel. And if you're going to tell me that here too we're talking about a nazir, is it really because you're not allowed to put it into your vessel? It's because we tell the nazir, go around. We don't want you here in a vineyard. So ein hachinami. Yeah, you're absolutely right that the real reason is because of lech amrinan. But I did the katani le belashin poel. But since this brisa is using the language of poel for a nazir, kanasiv la karav de poel. We're going to say that it's he's going to give the reason that relates to a worker, namely the reason that's in the pasuk in Devarim. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is lech amrin nazirahu. So that was effort number 5. Now, again, all these efforts, these effectively these questions on the potential answers, all don't necessarily have to be the case. They just undermine the definitiveness of the proof. And so as a result, again, we can't say that this is necessarily a proof. So Tashma, hasocher as a poel lekatzos b'se'enim. If you hire a work, again, now we're going to go back to our Mishnah, and our Mishnah said, if you hire, or actually it's not, it's the next Mishnah. This is a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Maestros. My apologies. This is a Mishnah in Maestros that if you hire a worker to spread figs to dry, so then as we turn to Tzadik Bet Amud Bet, Hareze Ochel Upot Patur Min HaMaiser. He eats from the figs and he's exempt from Meiser. Almanastra Ochel Ani Uvni. But if he says that I am going to work for you only on the condition that I get to eat along with my son, that my son also gets to eat, Oshiyoko Bini Biskari, or that my son should be able to eat as part of my wage, meaning I'm effectively buying his food with my earnings. Hu ochel, the person himself can eat upatur, and he's exempt from tithing because he's working and it's not a finished product and it hasn't been sold in the marketplace. But uvno ochel v'chayev, but his son can eat, but he is going to be liable for meiser because he's buying the produce at the before effectively it's time for meiser, and that means that it becomes time for the meiser immediately, and so he's going to have to take the meiser on it. But now, 1 second, if you're going to tell me that it's all part of the worker's wage, but now why should the son be liable? So Ravina offers the answer as to why the son might be liable, even though he's the worker is eating from his own. So because it looks like a purchase, and so as a result, we're going to effectively say that you need to treat it like you need to to take Trumas and Maestros, because it's like a purchase, and a purchase you would need to do that.
Well,
Okay.
this sounds like it would be a rabbinic enactment.
Yes, 100%. And so as a result, if in fact you were to say this answer, it would have very important ramifications for taking Trumas and Maestros from this for other things, or vice versa. So you're absolutely right. And that is exactly how you would have to say if in fact we were to say that the worker is taking from himself. So proof number 7. So now we on to proof number 7. And so now let's see. So here what would we have to say? Tashma. Again, now we're going to go to another Mishnah. This is the Mishnah that we're going to begin with, God willing, tomorrow. Tashma hasocher as a poala asos beneta rivai shalo. If you hire a worker to work on your 4th year fruit from a vineyard. Now, remind ourselves what the rules are. So for the first 3 years of no eating, exactly right, no eating. In the 4th year, it's like Meiser Sheni, meaning you need to bring it to Yerushalayim. Well, Hare Elu Lo Yochlu. If you hire them to work with your Neta Revai, the 4th year produce that needs to be brought to Yerushalayim, they don't get to eat any of it. V'im lo hodiyam. However, if you didn't tell them when you hired the workers that it was going to be Neta Revai, Hoda Umachlin, you need to redeem it so that they can eat from it, because they understood that they were being hired for something that they were going to be able to eat. You didn't tell them that they weren't going to be able to eat it, and so now you have to give them the food that's associated with it. Well, 1 second. If in fact you say that it's because it really belongs to heaven, and the heaven is what gave it to the workers, why do you have to redeem it and feed them? Isura lo zaki lahu rachmana. The Torah is not going to give to anybody something that's forbidden, and so as a result, why should there be any kind of redemption requirement? So again, this is probably what you would think the answer would be. It looks like a mekaktos, a false deal, an unfair mistake, a transaction based on false pretenses, because I thought I was going to get a chance to work in the field and eat from it, and now in the end I can't. Yes, it is true that Hashem isn't going to give me this, but you made it look like I was going to get it. And so that's not fair. And so in fact, we recognize the lack of fairness. And so as a result, we require presumably the rabbis require you to redeem it in order to make your workers whole. So Amos,
not the Revai, is that the Chayv ala Chefsa or ala Gabra? If it's ala Chefsa, then it doesn't matter. It has to be redeemed in any case, right?
No, you can take it to Yerushalayim.
Oh, right, okay, but
you can't. Okay. You can't. The point is that the workers can't eat it in the field, because remember, they can't take it to Yerushalayim because they're only allowed to eat while they're working. They can't put it in a basket. So as a result, that's why they are. That's the bottom line. So as a result, this is clearly a situation that it's only because it's a mistake that we're going to say that the worker. That the employer has to redeem it so that the worker can eat it while he's there.
Right. So then it's chayav on the product itself. So
yes,
therefore,
so
then they can't redeem it. They don't own it.
Right? Correct. That's why the owner has to redeem it.
Well, it's a machloket whether Meiser Sheni and Neta Ravai are really owned by the person who is obligated, or whether it's really God's food.
That is correct. We are going to see that, I think, very shortly. So let's take a look and see, because I think we might even touch on that machlokas. I think it's Rebbe Meir who says that it is owned by heaven. So, but Amos, let's take a look at the end of the Mishnah that we're going to see, or the next piece of the Mishnah. Nisparsu agulav igulav nispatchu chaviosav. If a fig cake fell apart, or a cask of wine opened, hare elu lo yochlu. The worker is not allowed to eat them because these were finished products, and now you're coming back to refinish them, but they were already finished products. And again, the only time that the workers can eat, as we've seen over the last few days, is when it's before a finished product. And these are finished products. The imlo hodian meiser umachilan. But if you haven't actually informed the workers that these have already been, that it's fig cakes that have came apart, or it's casks of wine that have opened, well, you better know that you're going to have to take meiser so that they can eat from it, because they might have thought when they were getting hired that they would be able to eat from it. But if you tell me again that it's all from heaven, amai meiser machilan, why do you have to take it at umachilan? Why do you have to take meiser? Why does the owner, an employer, have to take meiser and feed them? Isura lo zaku lahu rachman. The Torah is not going to make them subject to, give them something that would be forbidden to them. And you want to tell me, all right, well, again, it looks like a mistaken transaction. One can understand when a fig cake comes apart, so then it's apart. And so as a result, the person's going to see that the figs are apart, and he's thinking that, oh, okay, I'm going to put them together. And while I'm putting them together, I'll be able to eat some, because it's not a finished product. I would never have thought it was finished. But one second, if the wine casks open and you're trying to gather the wine from the floor of your storehouse, which is not a particularly a sanitary thing, but we'll ignore that for the moment. Everybody's going to know that the wine was already subject to tithing. It's not in the vat. So Amarav Sheshes. No, we're dealing where the cask opened into the cistern, and so as a result, as you were putting it into the cask, it broke and it all fell back into the cistern. So even though you might, if you knew that it was taken out, you would know that it is chayav in meiser. Here we have a situation where it's reasonable that the person would know. Oh, 1 second, Vahatanya, Yayin Mishiyerid Labor. When is it that a wine is subject to meiser? It's subject to meiser as soon as it's in the cistern. No, Rabbi Akiva, the Amr Mishiyakape. No, we'll hold like Rabbi Akiva, who says that you're only liable for the meiser when you skim the scum from the surface of the wine, when it is in the bore, when it is in the cistern. So to Amrulay, lo havayadinan. And so then the workers can say, we didn't know when you hired us that you were going to that the wine had already been skimmed. Asuki adataichu dilma makapa. Well, 1 second, shouldn't the employer be able to say, you should have asked about whether or not I skimmed the product? No, that we're going to allow them not to ask, because ba'asra dahahu gavra denagid ihu makapa, because we're dealing with a location where the person who does the skimming is also the person who puts it into the casks. And so as a result, if in fact you're hired to put it into the casks, it's reasonable for you to assume that it hasn't yet been skimmed. Now, we could answer this just slightly differently, right? We answered based on Rav Sheshes that the cask opened into the cistern, and that's why I might have thought that it was not yet subject to meiser. But we could give a different answer, because Rabbi Akiva or Rav Zvid says that the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim is slightly different. V'hashta the tiny Rav Zvid b'dvei Rabbi Oshaya, that in the academy of Rabbi Oshaya he taught yain mishiyered labor v'yikape. That what is it that the Chachamim say? They say that it needs to be skimmed. Rabbi Akiva Omer mishayish lebechavios. Rabbi Akiva says no. It's only when you take the foam off of the wine that's in the cask, meaning you pour it into the casks, and then it bubbles up. And so as a result, you take the foam off of that. That's when the product is finished. That's when it is subject to Meiser. So if you say that that's the moment, if we follow Rabbi Akiva, well then afilu tema shalonis patchu chaviyosav labor. Well then it doesn't make a difference, even if the cask did not open into the cistern. The point is that it's not in the cask now, and so as a result, they won't know that it necessarily took the foam off. The name of Lahui Bailahu Asukia Dataichu Dilma Mashle. Again, well, maybe you should have asked. Maybe the employer could be able to say you should have asked whether I've already had somebody take the foam off. No, but Asra Dahu Desharik Hahu Mashle. No, again, we're dealing with somebody who seals the cask. That's the person who skims it. And so as a result, it's not the person who puts it in the cask, it's the person who seals the cask. And so as a result, if a cask fell apart before you had a chance to seal it, well then it's not unreasonable for me to think that you were not subject to that this is produce that was not subject to Meiser. And if it was, you need to take the Meiser if you're going to hire me because you didn't tell me. All right, so the bottom line is that this proof is not a valid proof, okay? That we can't tell whether or not it's from heaven or not. So Tashma, effort number 9, as we come to the conclusion of today's daf. So,
but if if the barrel is sealed, right?
Yes.
And it was placed aside.
Mm-hmm.
So how would that perhaps Meiser was already taken?
Yeah, 100%. That we're dealing with a situation. Remember, the situation that we're dealing with is the foam was removed. So now everybody says that Meiser is required, and it broke apart. So now it is on the floor. Maybe it's all pooled on the floor. Maybe you've got it set up so that they're like little pools, but it's not in the original cistern. And now you hire somebody to move it from that pool back into a cask and seal it off. It is not unreasonable for the person to have thought that the foam was never taken off. And so as a result, this was not yet subject to Meiser, and therefore I can drink some of it while I'm doing my job. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the answer is no, yeah, that's exactly right. So you had the reasonable thought, and therefore I'm going to be required to do it. And again, it doesn't you can't prove from this whether or not it was the person's own or whether it's from heaven. So Tashma Kotses Adam al Yedei Atzmo. We also are going to learn in our Mishnah that we're going to begin with, God willing, tomorrow, that you're allowed to make a deal. Rashi explains Kotses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up, end of the line of narrow lines in Rashi. Litol mos below yochel. You're allowed to limit yourself and take money and not eat. So al yedei beno uvito hagadolim. You could do that for yourself, and you could do that for your adult children. Al yedei avdo v'shivchaso hagadolim, and for your adult slaves. Al yedei ishto, and for your wife. Mimnei sheyesh bahen das, because all of them are understood to have understanding. Aval eno kotzitz lo al yedei beno uvito hakatanim below al yedei avdo v'shivchaso hakatanim. But you can't do that for any minor. Below al yedei v'hemdo, and you can't do it for your animal. They don't have the understanding. They don't have the ability to recognize that they were effectively prohibited from taking the produce, and we're not going to undermine their knowledge and their assumptions because of your deal. So now 1 second. We must be talking about where you have already agreed to provide all of these people with their support. And that's why you have an ownership right in them, in what they make. But now everything works if you say that this is all from heaven. That's why you can't make a deal with respect to the minors, because although you have a right to the money that they earn, you do not have the right they don't have the ability to make this deal. But if in fact all of this belongs to him as the employer, and these workers effectively own it, well, and therefore he as their owner, as the father, owns all of their produce, Katanim nami nikutz lahu. He should be allowed to even stipulate that the deal for minors because he owns everything. So no, we have to say that we're dealing with a situation where he's not the father is not providing the mizonos, and so as a result, that's why he can't, and that's why he doesn't have the ability to make a deal for the minors. Well, well, then how could he make a deal for the adults? The adults have the ability to waive their rights. And so as a result, even though he's effectively gypping them, so to speak, they have the ability to waive their rights because they're adults. But the children don't have the ability to do that. So in second, Vahatana, and now we get to effort number 10, because Hatana Rabbi Yoshaya said, he taught a brisa that says the following, that has a disagreement with what we just learned. And maybe that disagreement is about our issue. And that's what we're going to say is in fact the case. We're going to ask 3 questions about it, and then we're going to realize that actually our explanation is right. Vahatana Rabbi Yoshaya, Kotes Adam al Yedei Atzmo, al Yedei Ishto, aval lo al Yedei Vehemto, al Yedei V'no Uvito Hagedolim. No, I'm sorry, aval lo al Yedei Vehemto. So he can do it for himself and his wife, but not for the animal. He can do it for al Yedei V'no Uvito Hagedolim, aval lo al Yedei V'no Uvito Hagatan. But he can do it for his adult children, but he cannot do it for his minor children. The coach is abdo ben gedolim ben getanim. Whoa, that's a big difference. Here we said that he can do it for his slaves, whether they're adults or minors. So my lav idi b'mala lahen mizonos. Isn't this a situation where both our Mishnah and this Mishnah are both dealing where they are providing basic support? Uvaha kamiflagi. And the point is that this is what they're arguing about. Demar savar mishalohu ochel, umar savar mishal shemayim hu ochel, and that the brisa holds that the worker is eating his own, and the Mishnah holds that the worker is eating from heaven, and so that's the machlokas. So we're now going to ask 3 questions, and with those 3 questions, we'll conclude that in fact our explanation that we just gave is the right explanation. Low, maybe not. Maybe everybody agrees that the worker is eating his own stuff. Below kasha. That when we said in our Mishnah, it's where they do not get support, and in the brisa, you do get support, and that explains the difference. So b'mayu kim to b'mala lehen mizonos. So 1 second, you're going to tell me that the brisa is saying that they did get support. What if he's giving support for his minor children? Well, then why shouldn't he be allowed to make a stipulation for them, for the minor children? So Sarayu dibino uvito kakatanim lo zakalei rachmana. Look, the point is that the rabbis did not give him permission to cause pain to his own children because they're his children, and although he has significant rights over them, he doesn't have the ability, and he has employment rights over them to hire them out, etc. But he does not have the right to cause them to suffer. And eliminating their ability to work on the job will cause them to suffer. So, but 1 second. Now you're going to tell me that our Mishnah is dealing where he does not provide support. So as we turn to Tzadik Gimel, Amar Ein Harav. That works according to the opinion that says work for me, but I won't support you. Shapir, that's all fine and dandy. But according to the one who says that I can force you to work and I won't support you, what is there to say? Meaning, of course you need to why is he prohibited from stipulating for a minor slave? He should be able to stipulate for a minor slave. So according to our Mishnah, so that doesn't work either. So therefore we come up with a second question. Must be, let's say that our Mishnah and the Brisa are both talking about where the slaves where nobody gets support. And this is what they disagree about. Demar Savar Yachol, Umar Savar Ein Yochel. And they argue about whether or not a person's allowed to say, work for me, but I won't support you to a slave. Well, 1 second, that's a problem because Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Yochel Harav Shavak Masnisin va'Avid Kavraisa. It's Rabbi Yochanan who says that that a master is allowed to tell his slave that that he's not going to provide support and do work. And now we're saying that that's the position only of the Brisa, not of the Mishnah. And Rabbi Yochanan is usually how we hold. And so as a result, we're going to assign Rabbi Yochanan a non-Mishnaic position? Can't possibly be. And so as a result, that leads us to our third challenge, which again will fail. So Ella Dekuli Alma Mishal Shemayim Huokal. So maybe everybody agrees that it all belongs to heaven and that the worker is getting a heaven-based benefit. Below Matzikatzis. And that's why you cannot make this stipulation. Umay kotzitz the Amar Rabbi Yoshaya mizonos. And when Rabbi Yoshaya says that you can stipulate, he doesn't mean that you can stipulate and get more earnings, but rather you could get food ahead of time. Rashi explains it in more detail that first narrow line of Rashi, she'itin lahen mizonos mikara harbe, that you get that the deal would be that you give these people a lot of food up front, and then shelo yochlu le'achol min hanab, and then they won't eat from the grapes. But that's because they're going to be full already, so there won't be any issue of causing pain or anything like that. That's why, and so maybe Rabbi Shai is talking about that situation. Okay, but the kavase gabi behemto teben nikotzla. But 1 second, does that work for an animal? No, it doesn't work for an animal. Or if you're going to tell me that it should work for an animal, why can't it work for an animal? Meaning, why not let the same deal happen for an animal? And yet, even the Brisa says that doesn't work. So this is what the disagreement must be about. Damar savar mishalohu ochel, umar savar mishal shamayim hu ochel. So in fact, what we end up with is there's a difference between the Mishnah and the Brisa. The Brisa says that you eat from your own, and in the Mishnah says you are eating from heaven. And so as a result, based on that, we would understand that this is actually all a gift from heaven. And so that explains all of the rules that are associated with it, and actually then helps us understand all of the other Gemaras as well, because all of the Gemaras can just be going according to our Mishnah. So we actually come to some level of conclusion, but now it's time to learn our Mishnah that we've been citing all day, or the latter part of today. But for that Mishnah to see it inside, we're going to have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
When Rashi mentioned earlier, when Rashi mentioned, he said he defined mishalo. He says tosefet. So right, that was the first. That's what Rashi said. So tosefet is something additional.
When we said the
initial Rashi at the beginning, when he said the difference between mishalo or mishamayim, when he defined mishalo, that's tosefet. That would be something in addition to the wages, right?
Correct. The point is that I would ordinarily hire you for $5 an hour, but you also get to eat. But instead, I'm going to hire you for $15 an hour, but now you don't get to eat.
So the tosefet is what? The tosefet is the wage.
The $10 extra that I'm giving you in wages, so that you don't have to eat. The point is that I'm giving you something extra. It can't be that I just prohibit you from eating and I don't pay you anything in exchange.
But we're trying to learn that the mishalo was referring to the food that the person would get. He's getting from the food, or if mishamayim, the food would be the extra benefit.
No, it's not. No. The point is that the food that he's getting is that considered part of his wages? Right. That's the question. Tosefes skarhu. That meaning, I'm sorry, I thought this was the last issue that we were dealing with about kotzes. But my apologies for going back to the prior topic. So the point is that this is the fundamental question that the Gemara is asking over the course of today is the produce that a worker is allowed to eat while working in the field, is that a gift from heaven?
Right.
Meaning he's not really entitled to it. He didn't do anything to earn it.
Right.
Or do we say Mishalohu Ochel, that he actually earned it? And when again, and that's where Rashi is saying Tosefet Skarhu, it is an additional part of his wage. Shehosifa lo Torah, that the Torah added to his wage and said, in addition to whatever you agreed to pay the person, you are also giving him this right to eat while he's working. And that is part of his wage.
Right.
And
so that was my point. So the Tosefet is something in addition to the wages he's getting, and the food is
correct.
that Tosefet.
Correct.
And if it comes from Mishalo, then
he would have the right to say, you know what, go send it to my wife. And in the end, we say that our Mishnah would say that you can't say send it to my wife, because in fact, our Mishnah is taking the position, or the next Mishnah that we're going to be learning is going to be taking the position you cannot send it to your wife.
But the pronoun here, Mishalo, does that refer to the worker or the employer?
Yeah, the worker. The worker.
And Mishamayim is an extra benefit, but it still refers to the worker, right?
Yeah, it's a benefit that the worker gets, but it's a gift from heaven and not based on his doing any special work. It's a gift from heaven to the worker, but it's not in exchange for anything, and therefore the limits on it are only the worker can use it, nobody else. It's a special gift from Hashem to this person individually and not to anybody at all. And so he can't marry somebody with it. He can't do anything with it. All of those limitations. It's not like real property. It's a benefit that he cannot pass along to somebody else.
Where if it's Mishalo, he could.
Absolutely.
And we conclude here.
And we conclude that our Mishnah that we're about to learn tomorrow is a Mishamayim. And so as a result, that would seem to mean that that's the conclusion that we have. That in the end, we're going to say that it's a gift from heaven, as opposed, because that's where the Mishnah goes, and not a gift from and not Mishalo. And so he does not have the ability. I did not double check that that's the halacha, but that would be the way normally the halacha would follow the Mishnah. And that was, of course, how we, noted the fact that, how one of the reasons that we rejected one of the other approaches was because Rabbi Yochanan would then disagree with the Mishnah, and we don't want to have that happen.
And Rabbi Yochanan seems to hold that it's
Rabbi Yochanan was the one who says that you can say, work for me, but I won't support you. And one of our other answers would have said that would be that the debate was over that question, and our Mishnah would say you can't say it, and the Brisa would say you could say it. But Rabbi Yochanan's the one who says that, so that can't be what the Mishnah and Brisa are arguing about. So as a result, we return to the final answer that the Mishnah and Brisa are arguing about whether a worker eats from his own. And the Brisa says he does eat from his own, and the Mishnah says he eats from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Looking forward to continue. We'll see the Mishnah, God willing, inside tomorrow. Have a great day.